Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Monday, February 27th, Des Moines City Council workshop. Our first item on the agenda this morning is the ETC 2011 Citizen Survey results. And hopefully the weather permitted this morning, and here you are.
You left home at 3 this morning.
That's good.
Today I'm really excited to introduce Chris Tatham with ETC Institute. He has presented our residential and business surveys for the past several years, and he's here again this morning. Weather did cooperate, and he will be running through the results of our survey from 2011.
Well, it's great to be back. I know it's been a couple years since I've been here, and a lot's happened both in the state and nationally. So what I'm trying to do today as I walk through the survey results is not just present the results to you, but try to contextualize some of the findings that we had. And I think everybody, you may have a copy of this, but this is generally what I'm going to follow today as I'm going to go through the resident survey results, give you some of the bottom line picture up front, then walk through some of the detail, and then I'll do that with the business survey as well. For those of you who aren't familiar with our company, we specialize in doing community surveys for literally, I think it's over 500 cities and counties across the country. We have about 200 and some that actually conduct our Direction Finder survey, which has a lot of the same questions that are in your survey. So I'm going to be able to share how your results kind of stack up to similar communities as I go through the presentation. But as far as today's presentation, kind of starting off with the resident satisfaction survey, maybe just a high-level picture up front is that during the last 2 years, the average level of satisfaction in most communities has dropped by about 5%. A lot of that's just because local governments don't have the same resources they had 2, 3, 4 years ago before the recession. So because of the cutbacks, services have generally declined, or at least satisfaction with the services. What you're going to see in this year's survey results is that you've actually sustained about the same level of satisfaction in most areas. In fact, there's been very few changes in the resident satisfaction survey results, which suggests you've done a real good job of managing expectations and investing in areas that are most important to residents, given some of the challenges you probably had to face financially. On the other side of the house, when you get to the business survey results, you've done an outstanding job. Business survey results are up significantly, so I think the future for the city looks very good, at least from the business community. So with that said, let me kind of walk into the overall findings from the resident survey. I think most of you are familiar with the purpose. You do this every couple of years to really get an objective assessment for how well you're delivering services, get some feedback about residents about what they care about most. So ultimately, if you have to make decisions about where to prioritize limited funds, you can be using input from citizens as part of that process. In addition, we compare you to other communities in our Direction Finder database, so you can actually see if 65% of the residents are satisfied with the service. Is that good or bad? In other words, what would you typically expect? Because what we found years ago, about 20 years ago when I first started doing these surveys, every survey I did, fire was rated best, and code enforcement and streets were at the bottom of the list. So we developed Direction Finder to really give you some context for interpreting the meaning of the survey results. As far as the methodology, the survey methodology this year was the same as in previous years. We selected 2,500 households at random. Our goal is to get about 1 in 3 to actually complete the survey. And given that it's 20 minutes long, some people say, well, why don't we get more to participate than that? Today's time frame, if you get 1 in 3 people with a 20-minute survey, that's pretty phenomenal. This year we actually had 819 households complete the survey, which means the results aren't perfect, but if we did the same survey 100 times, 95 times out of 100, you get the same results within about plus or minus 3.5%. So if you see 50%, the actual number is probably somewhere between 46 and 54, so it's not perfect, but it does give you a fairly good indication of how well you're doing. In addition, your sample size is large enough that you can actually trend information from one period of time to the next and be fairly confident whether or not things have significantly changed from one point in time to another.
When did you actually conduct the survey?
This one was conducted late last year, first part, basically in I guess November, December timeframe. So we rolled out the results and compiled everything in January, and that was initially going to be here a couple weeks ago to give you the initial presentation. So As far as the location, one of the things we added a couple years ago, just so you can kind of get a sense spatially for how people in different parts of the city rate different services. This map just shows the actual location of respondents to the survey. In the full report, there's actually a series of maps that show you kind of on a color scheme where orange and red are bad and blue is good, how people rate different services by zip code and census block group. So you can see it broken down in a little more detail. As far as the major findings for the resident survey, I kind of highlighted this up front. Bottom line, residents have a very good perception of the overall state of the city. When I look at several of the key indicators in the survey, overall ratings are very, very high. When we look at how things have changed since 2009, frankly, there's been very, very few differences. I'm going to show you a slide in a little bit of more than 100 areas that were rated, fewer than 10, changed by more than 5%. So frankly, the results today are about the same as they were 2 years ago. On the business side of the house, however, the results are significantly better, and the overall optimism about the community is much greater than it was 2 years ago. So I think you're certainly headed in the right direction. And when you look at how your results stack up to other communities, you're setting the standard in most areas, and I'll show you all of those details in just a little bit. As far as the first major finding in the resident survey, as I said, residents generally have a very positive perception of the city. We've been asking a number of questions now. You can see going back to 2007, which is kind of the red hatched line. The orange is 2011. This shows you the percentage of residents who gave positive ratings or fours or fives on a 5-point scale for the overall quality of life, images, overall quality of city services, and value for city tax dollars. You'll see the overall trend really hasn't changed a lot, but in most cases you can see it's kind of steadily increased a little bit from one period to the next, though none of the changes from 2009 to 2011 were statistically significant. If you look at the long-term trend, most of the changes are more than 3% in a positive direction, so you're moving in the right direction as a community over the long term. When we look at some of the major topics or major areas of city services that were assessed, this again shows you kind of 2009 to 2011. You can see again, most areas didn't change much. Overall fairness of city taxes and fees, which is one of the lowest rated areas, actually has improved 2%. Nationally, that's dropped 6% during the same period of time. So if you look at how you've changed relative to other communities, you've actually had a net improvement of 8% compared to the national trend. You can see perceptions of community access has dropped. That's one of the most significant drops. That's condition of parks, bridges, curbs, and areas and items like that. Perceptions of the community being supportive for youth and families is up significantly, of learning opportunities is up significantly. And you can see most of the other items really didn't change by more than 5%, so they've stayed about the same since the last survey. So all in all, you've held the ground in most of the major areas that were assessed on the survey. The other thing that we looked, oh sure.
No, that's fine. The people that are actually contacted and commit to doing the survey, do we track, are there any of the same people that participated previously, or do we have a whole new group?
We can track that. We don't. It's a new sample each time, but you could get picked at random. There wouldn't be a high percentage of those, but it's possible that each time you do the survey, because everyone's just as equally, there's a random sample in each period. So there may be some people. We could always go back and look at address information and see, whether there's the same address in there again. But it would probably be a relatively small group of respondents. When it comes to perceptions of safety, you can see as well, general perceptions of safety have held the same. You see the biggest long-term improvement has to be with downtown Des Moines, which only a little over half the residents gave positive ratings back in 2007. It's been sustained around 2 out of 3 residents now for the last couple years. And really, from my perspective, when I see all of these ratings hovering about the same levels, when the fact that I go from most city, a typical week I present 3 or 4 times a week these types of results, and when most cities are seeing decreases of 5 to 10% across the board, this is a lot to be proud of, that you've done a good job sustaining the service quality during periods of difficult time. When we look at some of the highest rated city services, you can see fire, library, various elements of fire and library staff are on here, your garbage collection services, and just the perception of recyclable collection services are all among the highest rated services. All have more than 8 out of 10 people giving positive ratings. Some of the lowest city service ratings have to do with the areas of code enforcement, maintenance, and you can see some of those on here: process for getting a permit, enforcement of land use regulations. The items on here typically had fewer than 50% of residents giving positive ratings. I'll show you how these items stack up in a little bit, but just for you to get a sense for relatively which areas are most likely going to get the most complaints or have the greatest concern, these areas are the ones that are most likely to generate those concerns. When we look at the next major area is just overall how things have changed over the last couple of years. Of the 112, 111 areas that were assessed on the survey, only 10 items changed by more than 5% over the last 2 years. The ones that had the most notable improvement since 2009 are listed here. Perceptions of the availability of your special recreation facilities, things like disc golf courses, skate parks, was up significantly. People's perceptions of their ability to ride safely on bicycles was up. Walking and biking trails in the city, your efforts to welcome people, or at least people of diverse backgrounds feel welcome. Fairness of city taxes and fees was up, and that was unusual given the fact that that's dropped significantly in most communities. And you can see the condition of streets and neighborhoods, condition of sidewalks, which were two of the highest priorities in your last survey, are also up significantly. Your entertainment destinations and enforcement of land use regulations. So you can see a couple of those items, though they're rated lower, the overall satisfaction ratings was lower, you're moving in the right direction on them. I think that you're to be commended for that, especially the areas like the streets and neighborhoods and the condition of sidewalks, which were relatively high priorities last time. You're able to move them in the right direction, even though financial resources have been limited. When you look at some of the areas that have seen decreases since 2009, perceptions of library hours, I don't know if you've actually cut them back. Some communities have kept libraries the same, and they've seen decreases because rising expectations for internet services. But if you have cut them back, then that's probably the direct contributor to that. Quality of community assets, efforts to keep residents informed, sanitary sewer system, sign regulations, recyclable collection. I'll note again, recyclable collection is one of the highest rated areas you have on the survey, so though it's down a little bit, it's not significant. And remember, most of these changes are barely on the threshold of significance. So overall, when you look at everything that's rated on the survey, most items have sustained the same levels they've had in previous years. The third major thing we took at is just the overall perception of quality of service in different areas of the city. And for this presentation, I didn't put all 100 maps in here, but if you're interested, the full report actually has a map of essentially every service that was rated. And you might look at this map and say, well, gee whiz, what does that tell me? It's pretty much all blue. Well, the point of these maps aren't for you to necessarily pinpoint exactly which citizen is upset in which neighborhood and go talk to them. The main point of this is to give you a sense for, are you delivering different services equitably throughout the city? And what you'll see is when we map the overall quality of city services, pretty much the entire city is in the same color, and the entire city is in blue. And that indicates that really, it doesn't matter where you live in the city, most people feel about the same when it comes to their satisfaction with the overall quality of city services. And that's really surprising. I mean, most medium and larger sized cities usually have some substantial areas of dissatisfaction when it comes to the perception of overall quality services, and you're doing a good job of equitably providing services everywhere. If you go through this on a case-by-case basis with some of the specific services, you will notice some differences, but at the end of the day, most residents, regardless of where they live, have basically more or less the same general feeling toward the city, regardless of which neighborhood they're living in. The fourth major finding on the survey has to do with you setting the standard for service delivery. We compared your performance in 42 areas against other cities that have between 100 and 250,000 population. Of those, you rated above average in 27, you rated below average in 14, and about the same in 1. And let me just show you kind of the findings for each of these areas. The first of all, I think, is really to be commended on and reinforce with your employees is what a great job they do at providing customer service. When you look nationally, 56% of residents in most communities are satisfied with the customer service delivered by their city. Here it's nearly 2 out of 3 at 63%, so your customer service is setting the standard. When it comes to the perception of your downtown area as well, 2 out of 3 people, or 67%, give positive ratings compared to just 59 and 56% in most communities. And even your communication effort, though not significantly above, is slightly above the average for similar sized cities and the national average as a whole. When we look at some of the perceptions, I think one of the areas you can probably take the most pride in is the one that's in the middle there, overall quality of city services. You know, this is the end of the day, kind of what I consider to be probably the most important question on the entire survey is how satisfied are people overall with everything the city does, and 7 out of 10 residents give positive ratings compared to just 55% of residents in similar sized cities and 57% nationally. So you're 15% above the average for most communities of this size. Similarly, the image is a little bit above, and the overall quality of life is significantly above. Cleanliness and value for tax dollars I didn't flag, but you'll see for value for city tax dollars, you're 4 points above similar sized cities, and you're 6 points above the national average when it comes to value for tax dollars. So you're doing a lot of key things right when it comes to what I consider to be the strategic level issues that really assess the overall health of the city. The next areas we looked at were just some of the specific areas of fire service, and you'll notice that your fire folks are setting the standard in every area that was assessed, so great job to your fire folks when it comes to overall quality of fire protection, how well you respond to emergencies, fire safety education, and your inspection program, all significantly above other communities. And you'll notice that fire safety program has dropped slightly from the previous survey, but you're still setting the standard. I think sometimes at the end of the day, you may see some decreases, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a horrible thing when it happens in a short period. Here you're still doing a good job with 2 out of 3 people, 67% given positive ratings. When it comes to perceptions of safety, you can see overall satisfaction or overall perceptions of safety in downtown significantly higher than most other larger communities or mid-sized communities. One of the things we've shown on here is as the size of city grows, typically issues about safety, people become more concerned, or safety ratings are a little bit lower. So you can see nationally you're a little bit below just the typical city, but when it comes to comparable cities of this size and larger, you tend to outperform them when people look at the safety in their downtown area. Similarly, city parks rated a little above the average for similar sized cities at 61% compared to 58%. Your parks and recreation system in just about every area was setting the standard. You're way above the similar standard for similar sized cities and also for the U.S. average when it comes to the number of walking and biking trails. Nearly 3 out of 4 people give positive ratings compared to just a little over half in most communities. You also see when it comes to your pools, landscape along city streets and other public areas rated a little bit above. Number and locations of parks, so it was about on par with other communities, just a little bit lower than other mid-sized cities. When it comes to code enforcement, you can see again a little bit above average, 52% when it comes to the overall satisfaction with the enforcement of city codes and ordinances compared to 50 in other communities, and how well you're planning for growth at 48% compared to 45 and 44 respectively. Now, those are generally where you compare more favorably. The area that you tend to trail a little bit has to do with infrastructure, public work issues. And you notice on the previous survey, some of the lowest rated areas had to do with street maintenance and such. And you can kind of see that on this chart, that even not only is it low rated, it's low compared to other communities. So you can see condition of major streets at 45% was significantly below other mid-sized cities in the national average. Conditions of streets and neighborhoods also trails both groups. However, it was one of the areas that was most notably improved from the last survey, so at least it's moving in the right direction. Same thing on the condition of your sidewalks, also moving in the right direction, but still trailing. But when it comes to snow removal, both in neighborhoods on city streets, you're definitely setting the standard in that area. You can see snow removal on major streets is at 73% compared to 67 and 64% respectively in the other communities. In addition, some of the other areas we looked at, things like traffic flow, your storm sewer system, and recyclable collection, all significantly above other communities. And I emphasize again, recyclable is one of the areas we saw a slight decrease in the survey, but all in all, even though it went down, kind of like the fire safety education programs, you're still setting the standard. Yard waste dropped a little bit, or excuse me, was rated a little bit lower than other mid-sized cities, but about average for most or rated below the north central average, but was about on par with other medium-sized cities. And you can see the city's sanitary sewer system, that's the one area you see compared to others, was rated lower than other communities as well. The last area we took a look at was police services. And you can see that generally for the key areas about overall quality of police protection, visibility of police rated about average. Concerns about response time were a little greater here at 67% compared to 73 and 72. And then the overall perceptions of animal control were slightly below. Both of those are kind of on the borderline of significance, but they did rate slightly below some of our comparative benchmarks. And then the last one is communication. This is one that you can be proud of if you look at the long-term trend. When you first started doing this survey, if you go all the way back to the first years, I think it was 2005 when we had the first survey, we made some adjustments. You were near the bottom of comparable communities on communication. You've done a lot over the last several years to really enhance communication, and now you're on par when it comes to availability of information and just perceptions of citizens with regard to how well you keep them informed about local issues. You're pretty much even with other communities. City's cable television channel lags behind, and so does the website. Those are the two areas of technology that as far as getting information out. However, I will say that a number of communities, because of declining, I don't know what's happening here, but in a lot of communities, cable television and viewership on cable channels has been declining as satellite television increases. So more video streaming and things like that have been what a lot of communities have been putting their resources in. And so that may be something that affects you as well as you move forward. The last major thing that we looked at in the survey was just to get you a sense for priorities for investment. And, and one of the things that we take a look at is just kind of thematically, what should you kind of emphasize to residents in order to make sure that they feel you're connected with their concerns and needs. And so we asked them to rank a number of items, and the issues that kind of rise to the surface are just concerns about fairness of city taxes and fees, quality of jobs in the economy, and visibility of police. Those are kind of three areas that I think you don't necessarily have to do a lot differently, but you owning those issues. If residents think that you're actually connected and concerned about making sure they get good value for their taxes, that's going to go a long ways to make them feel that you're in touch with their concerns. If they feel that you're concerned about the economy and jobs, that's also going to help bolster their support and their perceptions that the city government is connected and understands what their needs are. When it comes to some of the specific departmental areas, one of the things that we did is we asked residents not only to rate the satisfaction of different services, but also how important they thought each of those services were. And then we looked at what we call the important satisfaction rating. In other words, how important was it, what was the rating, and combine those two pieces of information to help identify what potential priorities for investment should be. In police, just the issue about making sure the responsiveness of police, you'll notice that was an area that rated a little bit lower. That's an issue that I think you need to probably emphasize to the extent you can, either through actual dollar investments or with communication over the next couple of years. We found oftentimes with police investments, you can get a lot of mileage just by telling people what you're doing, because they may not always see or have a need for it, and it's more their concern that they might need it one day or it might come up, and if they don't know what's going on, the investments you make may not have the same impact as if you go out and tell people what you're doing. When it comes to the Parks and Recreation or the environmental area, protection of waterways was identified as a top priority. The Public Works, it was continued emphasis on taking care of your city streets. Community development, it was the enforcement of cleanup and litter on private property and the enforcement and maintenance of upkeep of rental homes. And then the last one on communication was just continuing to find ways to make sure the public feels that they're involved in decision making. So as you boil this out and I try to identify priorities within each department, those are the five, or within those 5 areas, the items listed here will be the areas you'll get the most return on your investment over the next couple of years, whether it be by dollar investment or by communicating what you're doing and letting residents know what's being done to support those priorities. In addition to the resident survey, we also conducted a business survey this year. The last time the business survey was conducted was in 2008, so it was just on the eclipse of the economy collapsing. So this is giving you a good sense for what's happened since then. This survey was administered to 402 business owners or managers. We got a senior representative from each business to complete the survey. A total of 1,200 were selected. So again, we were trying to get about a 1 in 3 response rate, which we felt real good about. The accuracy of this is about plus or minus 4.8% at the 95% level of confidence. So again, it's not perfect, but if you see changes from about 5% or more from the last time, they are statistically significant. Most of the questions on this survey were pretty much the same as the ones that were asked back in 2008. One of the biggest findings on this one is whereas the resident satisfaction levels have stayed about the same, satisfaction among business owners and managers increased significantly in most areas. Again, in this chart, you'll see the orange is 2011, the blue is 2008, and you'll notice that most areas have gone up. The ones that I've put the blue arrows next to have gone up significantly. You can see when it comes to getting building permits, it's up 10%. Perceptions of street maintenance is up 15%. Not only has the percentage gone up positively, there's been a dramatic reduction in the negatives on street maintenance. And it could be that some of the investments you've made have particularly helped some of your businesses, perhaps on some of the major roads and things like that over the last few years. Stormwater drainage is up 21% compared to a couple years ago. Street sweeping and cleanliness is up 5%, and perceptions of water and sewer services are up 8%. So great job. Pretty much just about every category. In fact, with the exception of public transportation, economic development, we saw slight decreases. All the others were up compared to 2008.
Are these businesses, do they range from very small business with maybe 10 employees up to larger businesses with 500 or more?
Exactly. In fact, there's a chart. I didn't include it in this presentation, but if in the report, there's actually a bar graph, and we have all sizes of businesses represented. Pretty much mirrors the composition of businesses in the city.
Okay.
The second major finding is just how people think about the appearance of the city. This was a significant change. You'll notice that in 2008, we had 46% rating the appearance of where their business is located with either excellent or good. It's increased by 13% to 59% in 2011. The percent that gave poor was about the same, but the overall shift really came from people thinking from average to good is where you made some of the most significant improvements since the last survey. In addition, and this could be a function of the economy, but businesses are less likely to consider relocating anywhere, which is part of it, but you can see they're definitely less likely to relocate outside Des Moines. In 2008, 1 in 8 businesses was thinking that. Now it's just 7%, and then relocating within Des Moines has dropped from 13 to 5%. But about 1 in 4 actually believe they're going to expand their business, which is comparable to what we saw back in 2008. So bottom line was when we look at all the information in the survey, I think you can be pleased, at least from my perspective, having given a number of these presentations the last couple of years and having seen most communities do worse in their surveys. The fact that you've sustained satisfaction ratings among your residents suggests to me that you've been prioritizing your resources in the right places to make sure that expectations among residents are generally met, even though you may have some challenges with your financial situation. And more importantly, perhaps, is the fact that the business community have certainly enhanced their confidence in the city government. They're thinking you're providing better services compared to 3 years ago, so you're to be commended in that as well. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. I was asked to do about 30 minutes of presentation and then take questions from anybody, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Council, any questions?
Did you ask the businesses about their feelings on the fairness of taxes?
The fairness of taxes, I believe we had, let me look at the question. Let me just take let's see. I don't believe we did. I know at one time I think we might have. I just off the top of my head can't remember or not. So
that's where my head went skip too. We're under assault because we charge more in taxes than our value, evidently. Some think at state government.
Well,
but-
I would say that you could probably, independent of that, if people don't think they're getting good value, you don't see your satisfaction ratings go up like this. So,
Are you available to go up to the Capitol with us sometime this morning?
yeah, I mean, the reality is that people think they're not getting good value because, overall satisfaction is also a function of what you're paying. And so people's expectations rise when they feel they pay too much. And for you to see double-digit increases in satisfaction, clearly what those comments you're getting about value are from a minority. There's significant percentages that aren't happy, but 10, 20% of the businesses that are dissatisfied, sometimes they're the only ones that you hear from. But to see these kind of increases in satisfaction would suggest to me you're doing a good job. And then when we look at the resident survey, the value of fairness and taxes is up from 2009. I think that would really suggest you've done a lot of good things the last couple of years.
Chris?
The whole tax issue and value is probably most significant to me, and this is always one of my favorite presentations of the year. Two quick thoughts. It always astounds me how bright of a spotlight this puts on the really effective professionals that work for the city, from the city manager and city attorney and city clerk, down to the people that are cleaning our parks and cleaning out sewers. And I just, it's always, I guess, a blessing to sit here at this table and get credit for a lot of the work that happens day in and day out. So I sure appreciate all those department directors and leaders sharing that with our employee group. On a specific question, I think probably in the 2 years that's passed, we've officially annexed land in different areas. Is anything from those areas statistically significant enough to draw any conclusions? Like, could we look at those zones and kind of look at some of the things that we aren't doing so well in the newly annexed areres?
Yeah, one of the things that we do is since we've geocoded the sample, if we have layers that show where those new areas, we'd be able to identify, be able to pull that data out separately. So that's something that we could.
In one of the maps, I think I was looking at it correctly, one of the map that was all blue, there was a couple of yellow, which I read said neutral, and I think one of them was in the annexed area.
That
Was that up in
in the
northeast? Wasn't it
northeast area.
northeast?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
the northeast area. I saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe
Yeah,
initially you
that's
can
why.
look at some of the maps we've prepared and you may be able to just know where they are. But if you really want to get scientific and know exactly how many folks.
My guess is if they said they were, neutral or not as blue, positive as the rest of the city, there might be 2 or 3 things that would be good things for us to learn as we approach those areas.
Most of us all
So on that point, though, isn't it true that in some of those areas, the number of samples may be fairly small?
Yeah, that's why I ask if it's significant at all.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things, just going back to the beginning, we have this map. I don't know where the annexed areas are, but this gives you a sense.
Yeah, up there in
So
the
if there's
northeast.
only 5 respondents from there, you might see a neutral rating, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's statistically representative of everyone there. So,
There are 5.
yeah. Yeah. So over time, you'll have some sort of baseline, but typically when you annex areas, the population density is not real heavy, and so as a result, the areas in the survey are sampled in proportion to their population. So if you annex a fairly undeveloped area that just has a few homes, this sample probably isn't going to have enough data to really be able to assess what people there think.
All right, Brian, anything?
Nope.
All right, Halley? All right. Kip, Bob?
I already commented on the annexed area out northeast, so.
I do have
Do a little
a,
concentration and improve that area.
one question.
Christine?
And that, we talked about communication, but there's great information in here and areas of focus. So what's our plan and how are we going to communicate it? And I guess I'm looking at it even on a ward-by-ward basis to make sure that citizens are aware of this information and that this is something that we'll be using.
This is Hensley, council members. You might recall that in past years, we've produced a really terrific-looking document which uses art from local artists and then puts the results of those surveys. Our intention is to do that again. The one difference is that actually it was a suggestion from Brian Meyer that we've applied to the newsletter, where we've gone out and actually received donations, private donations, contributions, advertising and such to defray the cost of that. We plan to do that again, but use that technique on the production of the results for this. So our intention is to do another document similar to what we've done in the past, use the local artist. It really makes a terrific looking piece, and then try to get donations to pay the cost of the production and mailing on that. We haven't actually solicited the money yet, but I think that's a reasonable expectation, and it is a terrific way to get those results out. I don't know that we would do a mailing to every single resident. We've done that in the past. It's very expensive, but we would produce enough that they could be widely distributed around the city. So that's our current intention now. We'd be happy to entertain any suggestions you might have in that.
Well, it sounds like maybe we ought to put it on the website and increase the understanding of the website. And secondly, looks like maybe we ought to not only improve the programming, but maybe this would be a great subject to put on the Channel 7.
Mm-hmm. And,
which we're going back to, by the way, instead of 82 point whatever. And
Oh, I didn't know that. Fantastic.
I do think, if I could just add one thing, Mr. Mayor, the cable TV channel was placed at one of the upper numbers, as you just noted. It's since been returned to its old place as Channel 7, and I think that may be one reason why the ratings went down, because somebody could find the channel before, but now hopefully it'll be back at its old place, and those citizens will be able to get better access to it.
all right. If there are no other questions, we thank you very much. Valuable information for our citizens and also for this council to know what we need to focus on. And unless there is any other further comments, let's move on to our next item. You might hang out just for a minute in case we have a public comment at the end that they might want you to address.
All right,
thank you. All right, Mr. Manager, let's move on to the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. I'd like to make just a few overarching comments about the budget. We have on your agenda for this evening the public hearing to approve the budget for FY13. There's also on that same agenda an item that makes amendment to the current year budget, as well as diminution of positions, all that related to the budget discussions and the proposals that are before you. I wanted to make a few sort of general comments about where we are and the issues that have been brought to our attention by comments at this table and from you individually. I can't cover every single one, but I'll try to hit the high points of things that I've heard. The first thing, just as a piece of history, one of the things that distinguishes this process from past processes is the really extensive process that we've gone through to solicit public input and public comment. You had 5 town hall meetings. 3 of those were input sessions. 2 of them were sessions designed to review the recommendations and receive comment at that time. So really quite extensive town hall citizen input process. I thought they were terrific. I think it was really the best process we've had, and citizens were able to really provide some good ideas to it that did in fact guide what we did. In addition to that, you've had 9 council workshops. So at this table, you've met 9 separate times to review the budget and talk about different elements, and we've also had, of course, had the opportunity and will tonight to have public hearing. The fundamentals about the budget that we struggled with, in the most part, had to do with the shortfall in the general fund. It was a $7.2 million shortfall. We have recommended to you expense reductions that total $4.3 million. We've identified another $680,000 in non-tax revenues that have been applied to the revenue side of the equation, and then we've recommended to you a modest increase in the tax rate of 34 cents, which gets you up to a total rate of $16.92. That tax rate increase generates about $2.2 million. So from those 3 sources, the expense reduction, the non-tax revenues of $680,000, and the tax rate increase, you cover the shortfall. Just one thing about the challenge that we have this particular time in the budget. Of course, we have the ongoing structural deficit, which contributes to the challenge we have financially, but 2 other particular things have led to a problem in this particular budget. One is this huge reduction in property values of around $336 million. And then in addition to that, in my view, really extraordinary unfunded mandates that have come to the city, and I can mention two right off the head that have impacted our general fund. One is the ADA compliance, which is now something close to $17 million of capital expense that we've had to add to our budget, and the other is the ongoing increases in our pension costs. Both of those have really contributed to huge pressure on the capital budget, as well as rising debt service costs, which is a function of past bond issuances. So as we went through the process this year, we did ask each department to make recommendations. They went through a very thoughtful process. You might remember the presentation we made back in the early part of December, where we talked about above the line and below the line cuts. We tried to, as best we could, identify not only reasonable cuts that we could make, but also if we had to cut further, what that would look like. And I think it was very helpful to give everybody an understanding as to what would happen if we had to cut more money. In the budget proposal that's before you right now, there are 42 positions, full-time equivalent positions, so that's a combination of permanent full-time people as well as part-time employees. So there's 42 full-time equivalent positions that are being cut. The good thing about that is the actual number of layoffs is relatively small. On the agenda tonight, you're being asked to diminish 10 civil service positions. That's the actual layoff of those positions. Our hope is, and James can talk about this in greater detail, our hope is that of those 10 individuals, most of them will be able to bump into another job if that's what they want to do. We can't make that prediction with 100% certainty because the decision-making really rests with the individual to some extent. But hopefully, in the end, when the dust settles, very few people will actually lose their job. And one of the reasons that's possible is that we've been pretty diligent about keeping positions open so that there were a number of vacancies within the organization. So when this time arrived, we've got some capacity to make those cuts without actually laying off a lot of people. One thing about this budget that I've said and that has become really clear to all of us, and that is that we're at a point in our budget cycle where we've made a lot of expense reductions. One of the stats that we've talked about in the last several months is the fact that we've cut $24 million in prior budgets out of our general fund. If you all approve the recommendation that's before you tonight, that adds another $4 million. So in total, $28 million out of annual expenses in our general fund. What that means to me is that the reductions that you're making, you're really getting close to the bone. Making a lot more cuts beyond what we've done, in my view, would have a very negative impact on our ability to deliver services. And I think it sort of leads me to say that the recommendations that are before you tonight about expense reductions are really not ones that we want to do. But frankly, we don't have a lot of choice. We've got to have a balanced budget. We're not going to go out and use reserves to balance the budget. We're not going to issue debt to pay ongoing expenses. We're not going to use one-time revenues. We're not doing those things that are really inappropriate practices to balance a budget. It does mean that we're making cuts that are painful and really ones that if in a perfect world you wouldn't make. It's important to say that because I think a lot of people have concerns about some of the cuts. But frankly, I think what we're trying to do is make the best out of a bad situation. Having said all that, and in conversation here at this table and with some of you individually, there are several remaining issues. I want to just touch on a few of the major ones that have come to me and what our current thoughts are about that. Number one, there was a recommendation from the Park Department about reducing the number of blue barrels. Those are the garbage cans in the parks around the city. That produced a savings of around $80,000. It didn't eliminate all of them, but it reduced it with the thought that we would use volunteers to make sure that the parks were litter-free. There's been some concern about that use of volunteers wouldn't work and that there would be a lot of litter in the parks. That is a fair and reasonable concern, and it should be said that our goal here is not really to reduce the level of service. Our goal is to maintain level of service, but do it at a lower cost. Nobody can say with certainty that that's going to work. We're going to give this a shot if you all approve it. And then the point I would make to you is that we do have a contingency fund We have a contingency fund in the general budget, in the general fund budget, which we've had for several years. If this proposal doesn't work, or frankly, any other proposal doesn't work, we have some capacity, not unlimited, to go back and make some adjustments and make sure that we can do the job that we intend to do. And that would be particularly true about the Blue Barrel proposal. And the second area that's been discussed a lot, really particularly in the media, is the recommendations about the fire department and the cut of the medic unit. Chief DeKipp has done really a terrific job of identifying a way to cut expenses within his department and maintain level of service. I'm convinced that his recommendation is a good, sound one, and that we should implement that. But there has been a suggestion that we not make that cut and use red light camera revenue to offset that reduction. The difficulty with that particular recommendation is that we are using the red light camera revenue as part of the Budget Balancing Act. So we already pledged that revenue as part of the revenue that would reduce the tax rate increase, and so that money is in that category now. So if you were to utilize red light camera revenue, it would mean that we'd have to cut funds from some other aspect of the budget. So you're sort of in a circular argument at that point. Third area that there's been concern about is the tax rate increase. The point was made to me that, well, if we increase the tax rate now and then we come back in 2 years and have to do it again, it's just sort of never ending, and where does it all stop with tax rate increases? That is really a very legitimate concern. I don't think anybody intends, and I don't have any impression from this council, that you really want to get into a cycle of doing endless ongoing increases in the tax rate. What does that mean? I think it means that we have to really be diligent over the next 2 years to look at a whole variety of actions that can forestall the need for future tax rate increases. There's a whole series of things. I've outlined some of those in the blue letter that is attached to the item for the hearing tonight. Some of those kinds of things that I think we need to be focusing on would include the following. Looking at the Human Rights Department, a reorganization of that to see if we can lower cost. Intergovernmental collaborations, consolidation of services. Really one of the better examples is looking at the ongoing work with the Waterworks Department to consolidate human resources services. There's a way that we can save some money a little bit there and also save some money for Waterworks. That's an example. We can look at reconfiguration of facilities and services to achieve lower costs with libraries, aquatic centers, and community services. Those are all areas that are in the capital budget as recommended study areas. We need to look at some new revenue streams. We've talked about that for a long time. We've really never gotten there to the degree we need to offset the ongoing problems, but looking at revenue streams is important. Looking at our street light system, we have a very expensive street light system. The question is, are there ways to lower that cost? We ought to be looking at that with a lot of energy and thought. And then last but not least, looking at the use of volunteers and perhaps expanded fundraising grant writing efforts that can be used to offset some of our costs that we're facing now. So those are some general areas of inquiry and responses from me in terms of how to address those things. Probably the most important thing I've said here in my mind is the fact that we really have to look at the strategic initiatives over the next 2 years, look for ways to reduce expenses on an ongoing basis, or perhaps look at the revenue side of the equation as well. The last thing I want to say is that don't forget there's no small part of our solution here that's attributable to the collective bargaining agreement that we just approved a couple meetings ago. Those agreements with 4 of our unions talked about an average annual increase over the 3 years of those contracts of 1.27%. That's an extraordinary deal in terms of the overall cost of compensation for those employees, and it is indeed an important part of our ability to balance this budget. The one thing that we haven't touched on is housing. The Housing Department was mentioned at our last meeting that there are a number of challenges in the Housing Services Department as a result of reductions in federal funding. Doug Romig couldn't be here today, but Alan McKinley is going to give you...
Doug is here.
Is Doug here?
Yeah. We can introduce you after the meeting.
Why don't you come on up, Doug, and between the two of you, if you talk a little bit about the recommendations in housing services to balance your budget as a result of the federal cuts.
Okay. Alan McKinley, Deputy City Manager. You should have received a letter dated February 23rd, I believe, that outlines kind of a history of the housing services, and I'm sure Doug can pop up and fill in most of the gaps if I leave any out. But the Housing Services Department over the last 2 or 3 years has been faced with federal cuts, grant cuts, grant reductions that have been addressed in the budget partially by reductions in the operating budget, as well as the use of some reserves that, if we're not otherwise used, would likely have to be returned to the federal government. So in the initial years, 11 and 12, the current fiscal year, there was both a combination of reduction of expenses and the use of reserves that eventually, as we approach FY13, the use of the reserves obviously would no longer be a viable revenue source to pay for ongoing expenses. There's about $215,000 of reductions that happened in FY12 that were implemented in the budget that are outlined in the letter. In FY13, there is again another anticipated $200,000 reduction, and Doug's department, and Doug has really taken the lead in working with a variety of different tactics on how to address that reduction in grant funding, and he's been working with myself and Larry Hulson, the city manager, to discuss what options are available. There's basically 2 options, and we're going to be presenting these to you on March 12th that will again provide for ultimately a balanced budget, no longer utilizing reserves. One will be a further reduction in positions that will also relate to a reduction in services as well. And the alternative would be to actually utilize some capital funds that are available that you are all well aware of from the disposition of homes. By making a capital investment, we would be able to reduce our operating expenses, primarily in rent, and actually to be able to generate some income and develop some synergy with some other service delivery organizations. That presentation is planned to come to you on March 12th as an option on alternatives to either reducing operating expenses further or to pursue this capital investment plan that would allow us to maintain services or actually increase them.
So Alan, the budget that we're being asked to approve tonight then, that's going to be presented to us on the 12th with some of these options?
The budget that's being presented tonight, and Doug can comment, but is a balanced budget. It anticipates the possibility of actually having to reduce all the expenditures, but one alternative. So that's what's being adopted tonight. But then on the 12th, we'll provide an alternative to that, which would be the capital investment program.
Which would be actually moving into new space.
Right.
Okay. So then would we be doing an amended budget then?
We would probably take care of that. Obviously, it's not something that gets accomplished in 3 months or 6 months, but we would be able to reflect that in the amended budget next year. But it takes time for us, obviously, it would take time to do the acquisition, or excuse me, the appraisal, the acquisition, the renovation work, and then actual move.
But just to be clear, we're not asking you to make that decision about the move tonight.
Correct.
It's a big decision, and you need time to kind of think about that and give some direction on it. So we're asking you to balance the budget a different way, but the expectation is that we'll come back to you within, a few weeks to have that broader discussion.
Right.
Okay.
Any questions? Alan, thank you. By the way, Mr. Manager, as we talk about unfunded mandates, there's that one other little one that we sometimes overlook, which is that storm sanitary sewer separation. $274 million that is now part of our budget that has been sort of mandated by EPA and the Department of Justice. So we're working towards that. And certainly when we built our sewer system, we thought we had a state-of-the-art system, and now we discover under new regulations they are not. So lots of these things just continue to crop up. I would, Mr. Manager, like to have you discuss often on some of my trips to D.C., we look at lots of federal funding opportunities, and there's a number of grants that are out there, and I know that there's some COP grants, and there are also, on occasion, some fire opportunities. And when I come back and we discuss some of these things, I know that there has been some discussion about a fire grant. And I think that you and the chief have discussed that, and I have with both of you. But I think that because we continue to receive a couple of emails and phone calls, maybe it'd be appropriate at this point to re-look at that and talk about whether it's appropriate to use that or not and make application. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to have Chief DeKipp respond to that. So.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, John Kipp, Chief of the Fire Department. We do routinely look at all grants that are available. When you look at on the equipment side, on the capital side, we've received several Fire Act grants. Our last generator program, hundreds of thousands of dollars, supplanted by Fire Act grants. The grant specifically that's been discussed lately is the SAFER grant. And I'll get it wrong, but I believe it's the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response grant. It previously was a grant process where there was an ascending or a relationship between how much grant dollars were on the front end, where the cities had zero match, and then over time that became the city's responsibility to take on those salaries. And then you had to keep those positions online for a number of years afterwards. The SAFER grant is much improved now, where there is not a responsibility to retain those positions, and there's not a limit on the amount of money on the front end that a community can ask for, and it's a 2-year process. However, I do not recommend that the city apply for a SAFER grant at this point in time. One is the grant process would not start and end until later this year, so the 2-year window happens at that time. While we would not have to retain those positions, if the city's revenue was struck in any way, for example, if the state legislature were to propose something and pass it that lowered our revenues by adjusting the commercial property tax, we would be unable to make any adjustments within the fire department for a period of 2 years, whether they were from the SAFER funded or non-SAFER funded positions. If you looked at this as an opportunity to bring on new people and simply train them and later have the opportunity of keeping them or not, that actually hurts our staffing, because we have to pull firefighters and fire officers away from their regular duties to train these people. And then at the end, it's a bit of a gamble to say, well, we don't even know if we get to keep them, because it takes 18 months to 2 years to bring our people on in the first place and get them trained, and then not get to keep them. There will be another window in which the SAFER grant will be possible later this year. I think that is the time to really vet out that grant process and see if it's applicable to us. We'll know what's going to happen with the legislature and what's not going to happen, and we'll know better what our options are then. I think the smart play is take advantage of the recommendation that I made and the manager made to you, and then reevaluate the SAFER grant process this fall.
Any questions for the chief on that? Because I think that we're all concerned certainly about fire services, and I think that I've had discussions with the chief on this, and because I continue, at least I got one recent email about it and a phone message. I thought that appropriate to have you address it, at least for clarification, not only to the council, but also to the public or anybody else that's listening.
Can I just make sure I understood one of the comments you made, Chief, that if we were to apply for the grant and receive the grant, it would preclude the city from making any changes in the staffing for the fire department?
Whether they were SAFER grant funded or not.
So it just ties our hands
we would be locked
completely.
out, yeah.
That's pretty significant. That's very
Makes
significant.
it tough.
Yeah.
Especially facing what we potentially could face after the legislature gets done with us.
I guess to me, I don't even understand the logic of that. I understand on the SAFER grant employees, but why they would tie your hands completely with the rest of the department makes no sense.
Great question for FEMA.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Let's not go down the FEMA road at the moment.
Yeah.
That's a huge discussion. Yeah. Anything else, anybody? Any comments, ideas, suggestions, modifications?
Mr. Mayor, if I could just say, if during the day you have questions about the budget or things you want us to address by, please give me a call. We'll do our best to get you an answer back before the meeting.
I've continued over the weekend even to have conversations with the Parks Director and Rick about the Blue Barrel program. That concerns me a great deal, and I've just tried to understand exactly what all the duties are of those people that are, of those jobs that are being eliminated. I don't want to find out in 6 months, well, those guys were also the ones that did X or Y or whatever. I think a whole bunch of people in our community utilize our parks because it's the one kind of recreational activity opportunity they have because they're free. And I want them to be really high quality. So I've continued to look at that and make sure that we aren't making any mistakes there.
I think it would be helpful, Rick, you talked about the bumping rights that employees have, and historically, if you look back at what we've done from a city perspective previously on this, how many employees, when we get to the final place on these positions, actually end up losing their positions with the city, just on a percentage-wise basis? It sounds as if by the time we go through the process that there's probably very few.
Well, I think that may be true this time. 2 years ago when we made cuts, I think it was maybe a little bit of a different story. But I think before I say too much, we really need to generate the data, and we'll try to do that to give you a sense. I think your question is of if you look at total position elimination, how many of those actually resulted in a person that didn't have a job with the organization. So
right.
we'll try to do that and see if we can get it together. James is nodding his head, so I assume that means we can get it together.
I'd just like to give everybody just sort of an update. Having spent this couple, 3 days this last week working on congressional issues and certainly the upcoming highway bill with mayors around the country, and also looking at significant occasion that happened in Des Moines where Vice President Xi Jinping was here, and we signed a very, very large trade agreement for a multi-billion-dollar sale of Iowa product. One of the concerns that everybody has is how do you get the product to market, especially on export, and there are some significant problems with ports around the United States, but almost as significant, if not more so, is the highway situation. And we are operating on continuing resolutions for the last couple of years as opposed to a highway bill with not really a clear understanding of where we're going, knowing that we need to improve. And certainly where most of the business is done these days and where the significant proportion of people, not only in Iowa, but every other state in the union live, which is in cities and towns, and certainly metropolitan areas, and where that GDP is produced, it's unfortunate to see a bill that suggests changing the formula from especially the old STP formula, which was 62.5% to these metropolitan areas and MPOs, to a 50-50 split with the state. We certainly have used those STP dollars and others very well, and we are trying to, I think as city councils and our MPO, and for those of us that sit on the MPO, and Mr. Coleman is the chair, I think he's in the process, and the MPO is over your signature, to put together a letter to ask our congressional representatives, both in the Senate and the House, to look at restoring that funding to the way it's been for the last number of years through the STP formula. And I think that it would be incumbent on all of us to not only here but around this state and around the country to take a look at it and certainly realize what the future of America looks like when it's predicted that 90% of the new jobs and the growth in potential and new business is going to happen in these metro areas. Certainly, we in Iowa often add value to the ag sector, and I think we ought to continue to focus on that and have a strong ag sector. But certainly, I think that the vision that they had in the past to focus the dollars to where people live and where people work and where GDP is produced continues to be of importance. So I have sort of taken it on with some other mayors to urge our MPOs to reach out to all of our congressional delegations to ask them to reconsider the formula that they are using, and to, more importantly, put a highway bill on the table that looks out further than 6 months or 1 year, that we can get at least a 24 to 60-month bill out there. So that's just to kind of bring you up on some of the discussions that I've had with other people from around the country, and if anybody has any input, I will include that in getting it back to other local elected officials around the country to hopefully give your input to them and maybe help strategize how we get to the central core issue of highway dollars, transportation dollars, because whether it's roads, it's rivers, or it's rail, all those things have to be brought up to 21st century standards if we're going to be competitive in a global market. So having said that, I don't think that, unless anybody has some thoughts at this moment, requires much discussion, but did want to bring everybody up to date on kind of what's been going on as I've been representing our city at the national level.
Well, you certainly have, and all I was going to say is a lot of times we get frustrated. We serve on a border commission, and it's pretty easy to put your finger on what we're against. You know, that's going to harm us. But I just wanted to thank you, Mayor, because I think you corralling kind of the interest of mayors around the country have given us an alternative and an amendment that's floating out there in D.C. that would tilt it back towards cities. And I don't think that would have happened without your leadership coming from Des Moines, but really spreading around the country. So thank you.
And I will say that both Senators Grassley and Harkin in the past have been very supportive of some of the efforts that we've had. But in this particular case, on this particular issue, the amendment to at least the Senate side of the bill was put forward by Senator Begich, who was the former mayor of Anchorage. So he understands local government pretty well and knows the importance and significance of making that change in the impact it would have on the highway systems around this country. So let's open it up. Anybody in the audience have any particular comments, questions, things that they would like to focus on, either on our survey or any of the budget discussions that we've had? If so, we would ask you to come to the microphone at this time. Seeing none, Mr. Manager, did you want to have a closing comment?
Thank you, Mayor. I sent to you by email a copy of a draft letter to the editor, which is one that addresses the property tax legislation that's going through the legislature. It would be my thought that this would be a letter that would come from the mayor and council, and the mayor has already given me some great comments for amendments. So if you do have any additional comments, why please let me know about it. I think it would be timely to get the letter out hopefully in the next day or two. Okay. So if you do get comments back to me, we'll make those adjustments, and then what I'd like to do again is to have it come from all of you. I think that's the most compelling statement, so. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you all. Look forward to seeing you this evening. This meeting's adjourned.